And unfortunately, our husbands, they're going to make mistakes. I mean, they're just like us. They're not perfect. So we're voluntarily making ourselves vulnerable to their mistakes. And that can be it can be difficult. But you know what? Our God understood this. And He's got a reason. He's perfect. He's complete. Even if our husbands aren't perfect, God is. And He's got a plan in all this, in assigning us this role. But He knows it's difficult. And I feel like that's why He's got that first word in there, in the verse, where it says, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. And what that likewise means is, I get how difficult this is, but I have just given you some examples to help you better understand my plan for submission. That's what that word likewise means. So what I want to do is just take a minute and shift backwards to where the likewise is. It's in the first verse in chapter 3, so I want to look back to chapter 2 to see the examples of submission that God gives. So if you'll look back at 1 Peter chapter 2, and let's look at verse 13. Here, Peter is... he's speaking to all Christians, to men and women, anybody that's a Christian, and he's telling them, he's reminding them that we're to submit to civil government. Everyone is to submit to civil government. Verse 13, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. That's why we submit. That's why He has submission. It's for His glory. And for His sake, because He has a plan in all of this. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by Him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. And He's saying, everyone, if you're a Christian, you're to submit to civil government. Because civil government was set up, God's plan is that it... elevate good and suppress evil. That's the plan of civil government, and we're to submit to that. So that means whether we like it or not, ladies, we're to submit to the speed limit. You know, that can be difficult at times if you're in a hurry and you're on a mission to get your things done. I mean, we can tend to creep up, but God's saying everyone. And we submit to civil government for the good of everyone, for everyone else on the road. And that's what submission is. It's for the good of the whole team, for the good of the whole family. Then he gives another example. And this is in verse 18, chapter 2, verse 18. And this is in the case of job supervision. And he says, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward, or also to the harsh. And that word fear means with all respect. So he's saying, look, if you have a job and you're working for a supervisor or a boss, then you're to do things your boss's way. You're to cooperate. You're to follow the game plan of your boss. And I think, we pretty much understand that. I mean, if you're working for a firm or something, you don't come in there and just rearrange all of their way of doing things and just start taking over. You don't do that. And he's saying, in the same way, wives, cooperate with your husbands. You do things the way that they prefer. Just like you submit in civil government and you submit in job supervision. But then he gives us another example. And this is in verse 21, chapter 2, verse 21. And this is the example of Jesus Christ. And verse 21 says, for even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that ye should follow his steps. So our ultimate example of submission is Jesus Christ. And if you think about it, before Christ came to earth and he was in heaven, every being in heaven, every angel, every creature knew who he was. And they glorified him. He was honored and glorified and exalted in heaven as part of the Trinity, as the Son. But Philippians tells us that Jesus he did not consider his reputation. He set all of that glory aside where everyone knew who he was. He set that aside, and he came to earth and made himself of no reputation and took upon him the form of a man. And he submitted here on earth. Why did he do that? For us. So that we could have salvation, so we could have relationship with God the Father. He did all of that for us. He set it all aside. He is the ultimate example of submission. So I want to look at what it says there, verse 22. What did he do? He did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. That means there was no deceit. In the messages that he conveyed, there was no deceit. And I think we have to be very careful as women, because we can be manipulative. We can be thinking one thing, and we can manipulate our messages to convey something else. And we can manipulate our husbands. We can do all kinds of things and cover it up. But this says there was no deceit found in him. And so that's telling us we need to be transparent. We shouldn't be hiding things. Have y'all ever bought something knowing you shouldn't have bought it and hidden it? And then later on you pull it out and your husband say, oh, is that new? And you go, oh no, I've had it for ages. You know, that's a little deceitful. And he's saying our ultimate example of submission, there was no deceit found in him. And look at verse 23. It goes on to describe him. Who, when he was reviled not again. And that when he was accused, when he was betrayed, when he was blasphemed, when people treated him unfairly, he did not, just like Sam taught in that last lesson, he did not return that to them. If he was accused, he didn't accuse back. It says, when he suffered, he threatened not. Now, to me, this is huge. When he suffered, he threatened not. He was treated so unfairly. He was so misunderstood, but he never threatened back. And if you think about it as women, as wife and mothers, let me say life will be unfair. It's just not fair because we work very hard and no one tends to recognize it sometimes. I just think particularly of laundry at my house. You know, when the 4 boys were all home, we had massive amounts of laundry. I don't know what y'all know about teenage boys, but at that time what they would do is, you know, they would wear their jeans, you know, and one of my sons, I mean, he's so big. He's over 300 pounds right now. He was a big boy. And I mean, his jeans were a load of wash, you know. And but what these guys would do is they would wear a T-shirt. And it hung down so far. Then you wore another shirt on top of that T-shirt, so the T-shirt showed, you know. Then on top of that, you'd wear a sweater or a jacket or something. And you never wore your clothes twice because you had to hang them up, right? So they got dumped in the laundry, and I could never get them to use a towel twice. And they'd sometimes use 2, one for their hair and one for their body or something. I mean, they don't even have that much hair. But anyway, massive amounts of laundry. And no one ever recognized that, you know, I did the laundry. I kept up with it. That's not fair, right? Okay, and so one time Sam says, I'm telling on him, he says, I never have any clean socks. Ouch. You know what? I look in his sock drawer and there's a whole drawer full. And what he's really saying is my favorite pair of socks is dirty. And so I am too dignified. I know this stuff, so I can't threaten him, right? It says when he suffered, he threatened not. I'm suffering, right? So I can't threaten out loud. So what I do is I threaten in my mind. I think, okay, clean socks is what you want. Clean socks are what you're going to get. And I'm not going to cook another meal. I'm not going to write another letter to a pastor. I'm not going to balance another checkbook. I'm not going to do anything until every stitch of clothes in this house is washed, dried, ironed, folded, and put away. What am I doing? I'm threatening in my mind, even though I'm not threatening out loud. And you see, motive matters. It's the heart that matters. And this says our example, the perfect example of submission, when he suffered, he threatened not. And I think, how did he do it? How did he do this? Look at the last part of this verse, 23. He threatened not, but he committed himself to him that judges righteously. And ladies, we're going back to the same thing we've been over all the time. We have to keep ourselves intently focused on who God is. We've got to know him. And we commit ourselves to him. When it's unfair, when life is unfair, we know he is in control. There's a reason he's allowing this to happen in our lives. He's molding me to be more Christ-like. He wants me to understand unfairness so that he can mold me to be more like his son, to understand that I can get my security and significance from him. I don't have to get it from whether anyone notices whether I've done all the laundry or not. I get my security and my significance from him. So you commit yourself to him who judges righteously, who understands all things. So what I'm coming down to is submission. Actually, it's an act of faith. And it's not faith in our husbands. It's faith in God, because this is his plan, and it's right, and it's perfect. But there's another aspect of submission too. It's a big word. Submission also includes adapting to my own husband. And I like that in 1 Peter 3, in verse 1, it says, likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. That means I don't have to submit to all men. I submit to my one man, and that's enough. But it also tells me I got to know him, because he has special needs. He's different than Pastor Rick. I mean, he has different needs in his life, and so I've got to know him. I've got to understand his responsibilities. I've got to understand his personality. I've got to understand all these things so that I will better submit to him, better be that rock of help. I'd be better able to enable him and empower him the more I understand him. So I have to adapt in different areas of life, and it's different for every man. Before I go on with this, though, I want to make a statement, because you all probably have daughters, you have friends that are not married. And it's at this point, I would say that singles have options. Okay, before you get married, you get to consider all these different areas of life in a man's life and the ways that we might be required to adapt in these different areas of life. If you're single, you get to think about all of that before you get married, and you better think about it. And so what I would say, if you have daughters, this list I'm about to go over in the ways that we as a wife adapt to our husbands, you make sure they consider these things about a guy before they marry him. And I'm just touching on a few things. There's a lot of things you need to consider. That's why we are big proponents of premarital counseling. But the first area of life in which we're to adapt to our husband that we're just going to hit today would be career. We're to adapt to his career. And how do we do that? In Philippians 4:11, God says, Paul says, I have learned in whatsoever state I am in, therewith to be content. So that's how you adapt to someone's career. And that means, like, if you have a husband that works swing shift, so you do your best to keep things quiet when he has to sleep. If you know he needs to work at a certain time, hey, make sure his lunch is ready. There's a lot of ways that you can adapt to his career. I know I have to make sure that if we travel all the time, so I have to make sure the clothes he needs are ready so that we can get them packed. I have to think through what I'm going to need to do when we're on a trip. So that's how I adapt his career. Another area where we adapt is finances. And the way that we adapt to our husband's finances is to be trustworthy. And that means if our husband brings in a certain income, we're to adjust our spending to meet his income. If we've set up a budget, then we're going to do everything we can to stick with it. And if things come up, that blow the budget, then we talk about it. We sit down and we discuss these things together. But Proverbs 31:11 says, his heart does safely trust in her, And that means when your husband is not with you, then he should be able to trust that you're not going to blow all the credit cards to the max. He should be able to trust you that you would live within the finances. Another area of life would be schedule. We're to adjust to his schedule, and the way we do that is to be organized. Proverbs 31:27 says, she sees well to the ways of her household. So we try to be organized. This is something that does not come naturally for me, and I've had to study. So I buy books on organization. I allow myself to watch a few things on HGTV that talk about organization and things like that. And I pick the brains of other ladies at church. I see someone that's very efficient. I ask them lots of questions about how they run their household and how they get things done. Okay, we're to adapt to personality. Didn't we go over that in the last session? We're to adapt to his personality. The way we do that is to be humble. Philippians 2:3 says, let each esteem other better than themselves. You know, ladies, he doesn't do the things he does to push your buttons. He does it. That's the way God made him. This is his temperament. That's why we laugh about all that, but it does help us to study the different temperaments, to know they're wired in a different way with personalities. Okay, another area of life where we adapt is in conduct and dress. And the way we do that is to be discreet and to be loving. And what I want to say about that is we are married ladies. So what we want to make sure of is that we don't dress to attract other men. I mean, now, when you're alone with your husband, oh, yeah. Hey, all of you need some sexy lingerie. Okay, you need something like that because you want to be loving. You want to be good to him. But we have to be careful, when we're out in public. And let me tell you that certain things for men are more stimulating than others. Men, I don't know why it doesn't do a thing for me, but they really like cleavage. It's very stimulating to them. And there's just some other things, that we need to be aware of, when we're in public, so that we're not stimulating other men. But just remember, in your conduct, in your lifestyle, you want to make sure that your husband is proud to be with you. Okay, another area of life is motherhood. Seems like when you get married, that's what happens a lot of times. You end up being a mother. And the way to adapt to that is to be flexible. And again, Proverbs 31:27 says, she sees well to the ways of her household. And this is something, there's a warning I want to make sure. I think Sam kind of mentioned it when he was going over the word cleave, and he talked about how, leave. He was going over the word leave. And that means your marriage is a priority. Behind Jesus Christ, your marriage. And we have to be careful we don't put the children ahead of our husbands. And yeah, I know when they're little. I mean, you have to make sure for safety reasons and things like that, you take care of the husband, of the children. But you make sure your husband knows he's a priority. And when you talk to your children, you always exalt your husband. You show respect for their father. Even if you're not married to their father, you need to show respect for him and show respect for your husband. This is exalting, but to be flexible. I know I used to think, I wanted to think that I kept my house clean, that it was neat and all this, but you can't be obsessive about that. When they're little, you need to adjust your life. And I know I found out that it did not matter to my boys if there was dirt in the corner. What mattered to them is if I had time, if I could adjust my life to sit down and train them. If I could sit down and work puzzles with them and read books to them. This is being flexible. And to make sure they were well fed. But if there was, it seems like, life happens and your agenda, your plans for the day get interrupted. That's when you have to be flexible. And you don't get bent out of shape. You're still happy. That makes a real difference for your husband when he comes home. So to be flexible, I think, is something that really helps in motherhood. But you make sure you always fit your husband in with your parenting. that, you say, let's ask Daddy. Daddy, just build him up in front of the kids.